it's healing, but it's also reprogramming, it's reparenting yourself, it's setting good programming systems in your conscious construct and in your awareness. But it's really trying to be a bit of a tap in to this level of conversation and level of chat. It's very difficult to get into something without being forced or bombarded with a certain point of view, and if you're into this, then these are the sorts of things that you think. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Going Dotty. I'm Therese Egan, and in today's video we're going to overview the major core pillars of what Going Dotty is, what it looks at, what it's going to be focusing on, and just give a bit of a talk through and a walkthrough about that. So let's crack into it. So at this point in the conversation, I would say that there's 6 major pillars of what it is Going Dotty is going to be offering and sharing. It's all about frames of work and frames of reference. This is all about the structures, sharing multiple structures, given multiple frameworks to give you the opportunity to be able to understand what's going on, to perceive what's going on, and the tools to work your way through it. So I'm just going to overview those 6 topics now in a oneer. The first thing that Going Dotty is going to be is an educational resource to learn about the energy body and energetic systems. So we have an energy body, an energy center, we have an energetic vehicle, so we want to learn about our own energy body. And then we operate in energetic space socially with others in the larger collective macro. So these are the 2 sorts of layers, I suppose, of energy body and energetic systems that we're going to be explaining the structure of what those are and how those operate. So that's the first major theme of Going Dotty. It's an educational resource about the energy system of yourself and the energetic system that you're interfacing it with in the world around you. The next core pillar within the Going Dotty system that we're going to be working our way through in significant detail is focusing, highlighting, and specializing in the mental body. That's mental body energy, and it's also our conscious construct. So as well as learning about our energetic body and the energetic systems that we interface with, we're also going to be going through in detail our mental body system. You know, your headspace, your mental health. That's so much why we consider this to be alternative mental health, because we're really wanting to provide the tools for you to be able to operate and understand the things that are going on within you, to have the tools to be able to work your way through that, to have frames of reference for normative energetic motions that happen within us, that happen around us, the skill of awareness, the tools of awareness, so that you can perceive accurately what's going on and be able to figure out the woods from the trees, really. All of this is about awareness, consciousness, clarity, empowerment, knowing, being confident in yourself and in your knowing, and essentially, eventually becoming your own resource for this information, because you're able to know yourself and you're able to navigate the grid of you and the grid around you. So mental body energy, mental body healing, mental body awareness, your conscious construct, how to work with it that's around you, how to call in the facets of it that you want. At this stage of the game, a lot of what Going Dotty is going to be and what it's going to be bringing to the table is this kind of talk through, walk through system. It's about introducing you to places and spaces within your psyche. It's about highlighting movements within your conscious construct and your energetic corridor. And it's about bringing to your awareness the cycles and the patterns of co-creation within the self and co-creation with others. And a lot of this is really about saying things that seem quite obvious when they're initially stated, because they are all experiences that we experience and that we all go through. But it's also about illuminating the underbelly of life, or the shadow side of self. You know, a lot of this conversation isn't talked about or shared in an open manner very much. And I can very much understand why, because it's quite difficult to articulate. And it's in hearing somebody else articulate these spaces, for example, through this sort of medium of a YouTube channel and whatnot, that gives you the opportunity to hear something, and that makes it more accessible to you than it would be if you were just left to figure it out on your own. So a lot of this really is about sharing time. It's saving time, it's sharing space, it's illuminating things so that other people have the opportunity to be like, oh, I know what you're talking about, or, oh, that happens to me all the time, but now I have words and a structure and definition to put to it. And once you can have a grip and have a handle on what's going on, you are more able to move within the mold of yourself. You're more able to be aware of exactly what's going on, make more aligned, defined choices, and basically be empowered within yourself. The third major pillar that we're going to be dealing with and working through in Going Dotty is all about your lucid structure. When we're talking about lucidity, we're talking about that which you are lucid to, that which you are aware of, that which your mental body energy naturally falls upon and aligns on top of. So what happens when your lucidity starts to change? When you start to notice new things in the same environments and in the same spaces or in the same relationships that you've been in already and you're comfortable with from before? What happens when you start to notice things and you don't necessarily always know how to align appropriately with this new layer of lucidity? So I certainly consider this to be something that happens when our intuition, when it just switches on, when it moves up a gear. And this isn't something that we can necessarily control. And that's one of the reasons why having this constant reference to a larger energetic system that we are, which comes back to our first primary pillar. You know, you've got the energy body that you are, and you've got the energetic structures that you're operating in. And part of that is the larger energetic system. And having some blueprint or map that your brain and your mind can just understand things. If you have a question or a gap and a hole in the system of information, that means that the mental energy can't run. So all the time I'm going to be peppering with suggestions of maps, and there's multiple maps, there's multiple systems. There is no one penultimate answer to my mind. And that's why so much of this seems very elusive and difficult, because we live in a very linear world. We live in a very definitive world, but the truth of life is that it's very complex because there are lots of choices, you know. So this is about sharing systems and constructs side by side. And on Monday, you know, this system might work for you. And on Wednesday, you'd need a totally different system, because our linking, like what we are linked into and as on a day-to-day basis, can change. But then also our linking can stay stuck in one place for a significantly long period of time. So that's why there's such a spectrum when it comes to, you know, if we want to overlay or parlay this with mental health. That's why it can be so all over the place. There is no consistency. There is no oneness. It's this constant movement. It's this knitting and this interweave. It's what's happening. It's why is this happening? How can we cope within this experience? How do we deal with this in a healthy manner? These are the things that we're going to be looking at. A lot of it is about why, structure, coping, understanding, having something to understand, and equally giving you the opportunity to be aware that you can let go of that understanding when it doesn't serve you anymore. You know, this is about making your way through something. This is not about taking on a dogmatic form. And what you'll find when you get through to the other side of it is that all of the context and the content doesn't matter anyways. It's just what you needed to get through it. And once you're through it, all of that stuff becomes not obsolete, but just unnecessary. It becomes sort of obvious. You know, you don't have to think about breathing to breathe. You don't have to know all about air to be able to utilize it. It just becomes a natural functionality. The fourth major thing that we're going to be looking at when we're working through the self and understanding the self is the geometry. The geometry of self, the geometry of who you are, how you are operating, and then also the geometry of life in a larger sense. So geometry in this inflection of the word, the definition that we're working with of geometry is the relationship between parts. So the inflection of geometry that I mean here is when we're talking about the relationship between parts. When you're trying to understand yourself, when you're locked in a dynamic, it's not just, to my mind, working on just the self. We also need this peripheral space, this conceptual space of understanding the other. So to understand the dynamics of why, you know, why do I keep on getting caught in this relationship? Why do I keep on getting caught in this pattern? Why can't I loop out of it? This is where the geometry comes into it, by understanding yourself and then understanding the constructs that you get caught in. And by having that understanding, and by unstitching from that understanding and sewing up your system so you're clear again and you can just run and operate. And what you realize over time when you've experienced this a bit is that nothing necessarily changes but your inner perception. It's our inner construct, it's our awareness, it's our capacity to be able to deal with things, to be able to cope with things. That's what's changed. That's what changes. You know, you could be in the same situation and you'll react totally differently. You know, yourself internally, the geometry of self, the symbolism of self, knowing who you are, knowing what's important to you, understanding why things happen in your life and world, breaking down patterns to understand why they keep occurring is essentially breaking down the geometry of who you are and what you keep on doing. And then we also have the geometry of relationships. So when things come at us from the external, you know, when we're dealing with toxic relationships, egos, narcissists, toxic environments, or however it's manifesting in your life and your world, if there's something that you have to deal with and integrate, that is coming from the external, understanding that from a geometrical perspective as well. Once you have an understanding of your energy body and your energy structure, you might be able to piece together, oh, you know, if we use the chakras, for example, as a way to navigate the inner self, and if you can recognize, oh, this relationship that keeps on coming up, this figure that keeps on bothering me in some way, shape or form is a solar plexus issue. So we use geometry and an awareness of our construct to break down our system to understand exactly where within our energetic body system things are stemming from, and then we can deal with them most efficiently. And then another layer of that is understanding the geometry of the macro. So what is our relationship with the larger structures? And I think breaking down the geometry of some of the larger, you know, world overview experiences that are going on with the collective at some stage might be a very appropriate way for us to understand and re-empower ourselves in a greater sense. So a lot about this is it's healing, but it's also reprogramming, it's reparenting yourself, it's setting good programming systems in your conscious construct and in your awareness. But it's all with the purpose of becoming this empowered individual within your energy body structure so that you have the opportunity to operate in a healthy energetic form. The last two pillars that we're going to be weaving in from time to time is essentially two threads of information that are very much required for context, I feel. So the first one of those will be explaining a lot about the industry. You know, I really want to share what I have to share coming from a place of how would I have appreciated learning this stuff in my former time as I was going through the journey. I think it's very important to feel like you're on an even level and an even keel with the people who are sharing information and stuff like that with you when it comes to this industry. There's a lot of information gathering going on. There's a lot of information sharing going on. And I think it's a lot about feeling inclusive within the situation as opposed to feeling like the person who's sharing the information is on some sort of pedestal or knows better or is some sort of teacher, which, you know, you break down the definition of the word and there might be truth in that. But I think when we're in this topic within the modern Western world, I think this concept of, you know, there's a guru culture going on and it's understandable why it's there, but it's trying to break down that construct and make it more open access. You know, everybody, to my mind, is freely entitled to this sort of education and this sort of information if it's something that they're seeking. Especially when you recognize that people come into this not necessarily out of conscious choice, but often because of necessity, because of things that are happening internally. They have questions, they need answers, maybe something difficult has gone on in their life and they need to deal with this, and we need to go a step further than the traditional construct that is available to us, you know, in the mainstream representation or maybe within the traditional medical community. The structures that they have are too small to hold the larger reality of what it is that we're really experiencing. And that's where this energetic angle on things has a use value. And all of this should be a tool within your larger world periphery understanding. But it's not the only element either. You know, you want to be well peppered out amongst other different resources. Having an awareness of where you would fit within the traditional psychological sector is equally valuable, because we have to be balanced. And it's far too easy within the spiritual industry or within the energetic scene for people to be too extreme and to be too ungrounded in the world. And I feel there's explanation for why those things happen. But again, if I'm going to be sharing this information, I want to do so in a way that's healthy, balanced, safe, and integrated for yourself. And part of that is having an awareness of the industry that you're engaging in. A lot of things have changed within the industry and a lot has happened in the last 10 years. So I do hope to be peppering those sorts of pieces of information into the narrative and into our conversation, because it's very relevant. It's relevant to know, and be tuned in to what you're connecting into. And that means being inclusive. It means bringing you into the conversation. It's catching you up to speed, really. And finally, what's going on here on the sides is we want to keep on peppering this concept of the larger worldview and the larger social model. It's not useful in and of itself to make statements that can be quite divisive when there's no context on the side. There's a lot of conversation going on within topics that would be alternative, the more alternative narratives that are aligned with explaining what's going on within the world in a larger context. And I think it's just important to be able to pepper out our field so that we have a larger awareness beyond the traditional media models. And again, it's just making reference to those so that they become, they're not new to you. It's just peppering your awareness with these are the things that are being spoken about. It's really trying to be a bit of a tap in to this level of conversation and level of chat. It's very difficult to get into something without being forced or bombarded with a certain point of view. And if you're into this, then these are the sorts of things that you think. And I understand where that structure comes from. I understand where that conscious structure comes from, or the structure of that consciousness, why it operates that way. But it's not always very useful, especially if you just want to be able to look at the information and perceive it as opposed to being forced to accept it. So there's a fine line between those two things. That's it for today's video on the overview of the main pillars that we're going to be looking at and working through within the Going Dotty system. I'm going to go into every one of these in a little bit more detail in another subsequent video, particularly the first 4, where I'll explain those a little bit more fully. This video is just the overview of those coming overviews. So I hope you found this useful. Please like the video, leave a comment below if you have anything that you'd like to contribute towards the commentary of it, and subscribe to the channel if you found it useful. Thanks very much for your time, and I'll talk to you guys again.